Imagine someone looking into your eyes, telling you they can't give you what you want, then walking away without ever looking back. Your first instinct is to fight for the connection, to explain, to convince, to prove your love one last time. Because somewhere inside you, a voice whispers, if they could only understand how much I care, maybe they'd stay. But here's what almost nobody tells you. The moment you start chasing someone who has already chosen distance, you unknowingly give them exactly what they expected. You confirm the story they've laughed and been telling themselves all along. That closeness always becomes pressure, that emotions always become overwhelming, and that leaving was the right decision. And that's why the more you pursue, the safer they feel walking away. It sounds unfair. It feels backwards. But human behavior is often driven by emotional patterns, not logical intentions. People don't always respond to love. They respond to what love makes them feel. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, rejection isn't always about your value. It's often about their relationship with vulnerability. Their greatest fear isn't necessarily losing you. It's losing control of the emotional distance they've spent years using to feel safe. That's why the response they secretly expect from you isn't strength. It's pursuit. They expect the texts. They expect the emotional speeches. They expect you to ask for another chance. They expect you to prove that you'll always be there. Because if you do, nothing inside their world has changed. The pattern survives. The emotional script continues exactly as it always has. But there is one response, one decision, one quiet act of self-respect that almost every avoidant never sees coming. Not because it's manipulative, not because it's designed to make them regret losing you, but because it completely breaks the emotional pattern they have learned to expect. It forces them to confront something they spend most of their lives avoiding. The reality of losing someone who chose themselves instead of chasing someone who couldn't. Choose them. Today, you're going to understand why the most powerful response to rejection isn't for another conversation. It isn't another explanation. It isn't another attempt to change someone's mind. It's something far more difficult and far more powerful. Because sometimes, the greatest way to change the emotional dynamic is to stop trying to change the other person and start transforming yourself. When someone rejects you, your first instinct is usually to fight for the relationship. You want to explain yourself one more time. You replay every conversation in your mind, searching for the perfect words that might change their decision. You believe that if they could only understand your intentions, they would come back. But this is where most people unknowingly make the biggest mistake. They assume that more communication will create more connection. In reality, with an avoidant, the opposite often happens. An avoidant doesn't always experience emotional pursuit the way you think they do. While you see your efforts as love, they may experience them as pressure. While you believe you're saving the relationship, they often feel like they're losing the emotional space they desperately crave. This doesn't necessarily mean they don't care. It means their nervous system has learned to associate emotional intensity with discomfort, rather than safety. So when you chase after rejection, something unexpected happens. You actually make their decision feel easier. Think about it. If someone believes closeness will eventually become overwhelming, and the moment they pull away, you begin calling, texting, explaining, or pleading, you've unintentionally confirmed the very fear that was already living inside their mind. They tell themselves, this is exactly why I needed distance. Not because your love wasn't real, but because their fear became louder than their feelings. This is why emotional pursuit rarely creates regret. Instead, it creates relief. Relief that they escaped the emotional pressure they were anticipating. Most people never realize this because they are looking at the situation through their own emotional lens. They think, if someone loved me this much, I'd fight for them. But avoidants aren't making decisions from the same emotional framework. Their behavior is often driven by self-protection, not by the depth of your affection. The more desperate your energy becomes, the less opportunity they have to experience your absence. And absence is often the only thing that interrupts familiar emotional patterns. Imagine someone holding a rope tightly in a game of tug-of-war. As long as both people keep pulling, the tension never stops. But the moment one person lets go, everything changes. The game is over. The other person suddenly feels the shift. Relationships often work the same way. As long as you're chasing, they're reacting to your pursuit instead of reflecting on their own decision. This is why emotional restraint is so powerful. Not because it's a strategy, because it's a demonstration of self-respect. There's a profound difference between loving someone and abandoning yourself for someone. Many people confuse persistence with strength. They believe never giving up proves commitment, but true strength is knowing when your efforts are no longer creating connection. True confidence isn't convincing someone to choose you. It's accepting that you cannot force another human being to become emotionally available before they're ready. When you stop chasing, you remove the emotional noise. Suddenly, there are no constant messages, no attempts to change their mind, no emotional arguments, only silence. And silence has a way of allowing reality to speak. Now the avoidant is no longer responding to your pursuit. They're left with something much more uncomfortable, the consequences of their own decision. Whether they eventually regret it or not is something only they can determine. But for the first time, they must experience life without the constant reassurance that you'll always be there waiting. That realization cannot happen while you're still chasing. The truth is, your reaction after rejection says more about your relationship with yourself than it does about your relationship with them. If your identity depends on changing another person's mind, you'll continue sacrificing your peace in hopes of earning their love. But when you choose dignity over desperation, something remarkable begins to happen. Your energy changes. Your focus shifts. Your confidence starts returning. And whether the avoidant notices or not becomes less important than the fact that you finally begin noticing your own worth. That is the response they rarely expect. Not anger, not revenge, not endless pursuit, but quiet strength. The kind of strength that says, I care deeply, but I care about myself too. And that kind of self-respect is far more powerful than any argument you could ever make, because it breaks the pattern that both of you have been living inside. Sometimes the strongest message you can send isn't spoken at all. It's choosing to walk forward with your dignity intact, trusting that the right people will never require you to beg for a place in their lives. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have after being rejected by an avoidant is believing that the only way to change the outcome is to change the other person's mind. They spend days replaying conversations, searching for better words, imagining one final message that will suddenly make everything clear. They believe if they can just explain themselves differently, the avoidant will finally understand how much they care. But human behavior is rarely changed by explanation alone. People change when their emotional experience changes. This is why the response every avoidant never expects is not another emotional conversation. It is quiet acceptance. Acceptance is often mistaken for giving up, but they are completely different things. Giving up comes from hopelessness. Acceptance comes from strength. It says, I cannot control another person's choices, but I can control how I respond to them. That single shift completely transforms the emotional dynamic. Think about what most avoidants have experienced throughout their lives. Whenever they create distance, they often expect the other person to react emotionally. They anticipate repeated messages, emotional pleas, guilt, frustration, or attempts to pull them back into the relationship. Over time, these reactions become familiar. They almost become part of the pattern itself. Then something unexpected happens. You don't chase. You don't argue. You don't beg. You don't try to convince them that they made a mistake. Instead, you accept their decision with dignity and continue living your life. That response interrupts the emotional script they were prepared for. Suddenly, they don't know exactly what you're thinking anymore. They expected resistance. Instead, they encounter confidence. They expected emotional pressure. Instead, they encounter emotional maturity. And that difference matters. Not because it manipulates them, but because it forces them to experience something unfamiliar. For the first time, they cannot define the relationship through your reactions. They are left with only their own thoughts. This is where curiosity often begins. Curiosity is one of the most powerful emotions in human psychology, because unanswered questions naturally occupy the mind. When someone knows exactly what you'll do next, there is very little left to wonder about. But when your behavior reflects confidence instead of desperation, uncertainty quietly enters their thinking. They may begin wondering, why aren't they chasing me? Are they really okay? Have they moved on? Did I underestimate them? These questions don't appear because you played a game. They appear because your behavior no longer matches the emotional pattern they expected. This is why self-respect is so powerful. It communicates something that words never can. When you respect yourself enough to accept rejection without sacrificing your dignity, you're showing emotional stability. You're demonstrating that your identity isn't dependent on another person's approval. That kind of confidence is rare because most people allow rejection to define their worth. But emotionally healthy people understand something different. Rejection is information. It tells you where someone currently is emotionally. It does not determine your value. Many people make the mistake of believing confidence means pretending not to care. They suppress their emotions, act cold, or try to appear indifferent. That isn't confidence. Real confidence allows you to admit that you're hurting while refusing to let pain control your decisions. You can miss someone and still respect yourself. You can love someone and still accept that they aren't able to give you what you deserve. You can feel heartbreak without abandoning your standards. That balance is emotional strength. Ironically, this is often what leaves the deepest impression on an avoidant. Not because they suddenly fall in love again overnight, but because they witness someone responding with maturity instead of emotional chaos. Whether they consciously recognize it or not, they begin seeing a version of you that isn't driven by fear of abandonment. And people naturally remember those who carry themselves with quiet strength. The truth is, you should never respond with dignity because you're hoping they'll return. You should respond with dignity because that's the person you want to become. If someone eventually comes back, let it be because both people have grown, not because one person exhausted themselves trying to prove their worth. Your greatest power after rejection is not changing another person's decision. It is protecting your own peace. The moment you stop asking, "How do I make them choose me?" and start asking, "How do I become someone who never needs to beg for love?" your entire life begins to change. That's the response every avoidant rarely expects. Not endless pursuit, but quiet confidence. And whether they return or not, that confidence becomes the foundation for every healthy appreciationship you build from that day forward. One of the most uncomfortable experiences for an avoidant is not conflict, it is silence. Most people assume that silence only hurts the person who has been left behind. They believe the avoidant quickly moves on, enjoys their freedom, and never looks back. But human psychology is rarely that simple. The absence of conflict does not always mean the absence of emotion. In many cases, silence creates the very space that emotions need in order to surface. When a relationship ends, most people instinctively try to fill the silence. They send another message. They ask for closure. They search social media for clues. They hope one more conversation will provide the answers they're desperately seeking. While these reactions are understandable, they also prevent something important from happening. They keep the avoidant focused on responding to you instead of reflecting on themselves. As long as you're chasing, their attention stays on managing your emotions. The moment you stop, their attention slowly shifts toward their own. That shift is where real reflection begins. Imagine someone constantly hearing noise in the background. At first, they barely notice it because it has always been there. But the moment the noise disappears, the silence feels almost overwhelming. Suddenly, they become aware of something they had been ignoring all along. Relationships often work the same way. Your constant availability may have become something the avoidant unconsciously expected. They knew you would probably reach out. They believed you would eventually break the silence. That expectation created a kind of emotional safety net. Even while creating distance, they still felt connected to the certainty that you were there. Then one day, nothing happens. No message. No emotional reaction. No attempt to pull them back. Only silence. For the first time, the emotional safety net is gone. This doesn't automatically mean they'll regret losing you. Genuine regret depends on emotional maturity and self-awareness. But what silence does accomplish is something far more significant. It removes distractions. Without your pursuit occupying their attention, they're left alone with their own thoughts. This is often when memories begin returning in unexpected ways. Not because someone forced them to think, but because the human mind naturally revisits unfinished emotional experiences. A familiar song, a restaurant you once visited together, a quiet evening, a birthday, a weekend that used to be shared. These ordinary moments suddenly become reminders of someone who is no longer present. The interesting part is that memories rarely return exactly as they happened. Distance changes perspective. During the relationship, an avoidant may have focused primarily on moments of emotional pressure or conflict. After enough time passes, those memories often lose intensity. Instead, the mind begins remembering laughter, comfort, encouragement. and moments that once felt ordinary but now carry unexpected emotional weight. Psychologists sometimes describe this as emotional reprocessing. The brain naturally reorganizes experiences over time, especially when immediate stress has faded. What once felt overwhelming may later appear manageable. What was taken for granted may begin to feel valuable. But this process cannot happen if every day brings another emotional confrontation. Silence creates room for perspective, and perspective creates the possibility of insight. At the same time, silence serves another purpose. It gives you something you've probably been missing for a long time: your own life. Instead of measuring every day by whether they contacted you, you begin investing your energy elsewhere. You rediscover hobbies that made you feel alive. You reconnect with people who genuinely appreciate your presence. You focus on your health, your work, your purpose, and your future. Slowly, your identity stops revolving around someone else's emotional availability. This is where the real transformation begins. Because while the avoidant may finally be facing the reality of your absence, you're learning something even more valuable. You are learning that peace does not come from getting someone back. It comes from getting yourself back. Many people misunderstand no contact as a strategy designed to create regret. In reality, healthy no contact is about creating clarity. Clarity for them, clarity for you. It allows both people to discover who they are without constantly reacting to each other's emotions. If the avoidant chooses to grow, they'll eventually recognize the role fear played in their decisions. If they choose not to grow, that becomes clear as well. Either outcome gives you an answer, and answers are far healthier than endless uncertainty. So don't fear the silence. Respect it, because silence has a way of revealing truths that constant conversation often hides. That it reveals who genuinely values your presence. It reveals who is willing to face their own emotional patterns. Most importantly, it reveals whether you can build a life so meaningful that your happiness no longer depends on another person's decision to stay or leave. That is the hidden power of silence. It doesn't force someone to change. It simply creates the conditions where real change, if it is ever going to happen, finally has the opportunity to begin. Many people assume that once an avoidant rejects someone, they stop thinking about them entirely. They imagine the avoidant closes the door, moves on, and never looks back. But human behavior is rarely that simple. One of the least understood aspects of avoidant attachment is that many avoidants continue, observing from a distance, long after the relationship ends. They may not send a message. They may not call. They may never admit what they're feeling. Yet curiosity often remains alive beneath the surface. This isn't because they're playing games in every situation. It's because distance feels safer than vulnerability. Watching from afar allows them to satisfy their curiosity without exposing themselves. Emotionally, it gives them information while protecting them from the discomfort of direct connection. Think about it for a moment. During the relationship, they became familiar with your routines. They knew how you reacted after disagreements. They knew you would likely reach out first. They knew your love often kept the connection alive, even when they pulled away. That predictability became part of the relationship itself. Then something changes. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop trying to convince them to stay. For the first time, they no longer know what's happening in your world. And uncertainty naturally creates curiosity. Human beings are wired to notice unfinished stories. When we don't know the ending, our minds continue searching for answers. This is why an avoidant may occasionally look at your social media, ask mutual friends how you're doing, or quietly wonder whether you've moved on. They're not always looking because they're ready to come back. Sometimes they're simply trying to understand a reality they didn't expect. What are they doing now? Have they met someone else? Are they happier without me? Did they really move on? These questions often appear because your silence removed the certainty they once relied upon. Here's where many people make a critical mistake. The moment they suspect the avoidant might be watching, they begin performing. They post photos hoping to trigger jealousy. They write emotional quotes designed to send hidden messages. They pretend to be happier than they really are. They carefully build an online image with one goal in mind: getting the avoidant's attention. But forced confidence is easy to recognize. Real growth doesn't need an audience. The most powerful transformation happens quietly. It happens when you wake up early to improve yourself, instead of checking whether they viewed your story. It happens when you invest in your career, instead of replaying old conversations. It happens when you spend time with people who genuinely appreciate your presence, instead of waiting for someone who couldn't fully value it. This kind of growth creates something that can't be manufactured: authenticity. And authenticity has a powerful effect on human psychology. When people see someone genuinely becoming stronger, not to prove a point, but because they chose a better life, they naturally become curious. They begin wondering what changed. They notice the difference in your energy. They sense a confidence that wasn't there before. The avoidant may realize that the person they once knew is no longer standing still. You are moving forward. You are building a meaningful life. You are no longer waiting for permission to be happy. That realization often carries more emotional weight than any emotional speech ever could. But remember something important. Your personal growth should never become another strategy to make someone regret rejecting you. The moment your self-improvement becomes dependent on whether they're watching, you've unknowingly handed your power back to them. Your progress is no longer for you. It becomes another attempt to earn validation. True healing works differently. You exercise because your body deserves strength. You learn because your mind deserves growth. You build meaningful friendships because your life deserves healthy connections. You pursue your purpose because your future matters. Whether the avoidant notices any of it becomes secondary. Ironically, this mindset is often what creates the greatest impact. People are naturally drawn to those who no longer seek constant approval. Quiet confidence communicates emotional security. It says, "I value myself, whether you recognize my worth or not." That kind of stability is rare, and it often leaves a lasting impression. If an avoidant is watching from a distance, what they are truly looking for isn't another emotional appeal. They're observing whether the pattern has changed. They want to see if you're still revolving your life around them, or if you become someone who stands firmly on your own. When they witness genuine emotional independence, it challenges the assumptions they once had about you. It shows them that your love was never weakness, your kindness was never desperation, and your decision to move forward was not an act of revenge, it was an act of self-respect. Whether they ever step out of the shadows or remain silent forever is ultimately their choice. But your responsibility is not to perform for someone else's attention. Your responsibility is to become the kind of person who no longer measures success by who is watching from a distance. Real success is waking up each day knowing that your happiness is no longer controlled by another person's rejection. That is the transformation that changes not only this relationship, but every relationship that follows. There comes a moment in many relationships when the avoidant finally realizes that what they walked away from was never ordinary. During the relationship, your love may have seemed predictable. Your patience became familiar. Your forgiveness became expected. Your consistency felt like something that would always be there. Human beings have an incredible ability to overlook what is constantly available. We often don't recognize the value of something until its absence creates a space that nothing else can fill. For many avoidants, this realization doesn't happen while the relationship is alive. It often begins after enough time has passed for emotions to settle and reality to replace assumptions. At first, they may believe they simply left another relationship behind, but slowly, they begin recognizing that they didn't just lose another partner, they lost someone who genuinely cared, someone who stayed through difficult conversations, someone who believed in them even when they doubted themselves, someone who offered patience instead of judgment, someone who loved them despite the walls they kept building. Those qualities are far rarer than most people realize. In today's world, genuine loyalty, emotional maturity, honesty, and consistent effort are difficult to find. Yet while those qualities are present every day, they often go unnoticed because familiarity hides appreciation. The avoidant may have spent so much energy protecting themselves from vulnerability that they never stop to appreciate the person standing beside them. Then life begins teaching its own lessons. They meet new people. They experience conversations that lack depth. They encounter relationships built on convenience instead of commitment. They discover that not everyone listens with patience. Not everyone forgives mistakes. Not everyone offers unconditional encouragement. Slowly, comparison begins happening naturally. Without trying, your memory starts becoming the standard against which new experiences are measured. This isn't because you're perfect. No one is. It's because authenticity leaves an imprint that temporary attraction cannot replace. The kindness you showed, the emotional safety you created, the stability you offered. Those things become clearer with distance than they ever were during the relationship itself. This realization can be uncomfortable because it forces the avoidant to question the story they once told themselves. Perhaps they believed they were simply choosing freedom. Perhaps they convinced themselves they could easily find another connection, just as meaningful. But life has a way of revealing that genuine connections are not created every day. Rare people are not defined by perfection. They are defined by consistency, integrity, compassion, and the ability to love without pretending to be someone they're not. However, there is an important truth you must never forget. Your goal should never be to become rare so someone regrets rejecting you. That keeps your happiness tied to their opinion. Instead, become rare because of the standards you choose to live by. Become the person who keeps their word, the person who grows through pain instead of becoming bitter, the person who communicates honestly, the person who protects their peace without losing their kindness, the person who respects themselves enough to walk away from relationships that require constant sacrifice without mutual effort. Those qualities don't just attract healthier relationships, they create a healthier life. Ironically, this is often when the avoidant notices the greatest change. They realize you didn't spend months trying to prove your worth. You didn't remain frozen in time waiting for another opportunity. You kept growing. You built a meaningful life. You became emotionally stronger, not because someone applauded your progress, but because you decided your future was worth investing in. That kind of transformation speaks louder than words ever could. It quietly communicates something powerful. I loved you sincerely, but I refused to lose myself after losing the relationship. That message carries far more weight than endless explanations. Whether the avoidant reaches out or silently carries that realization for years is no longer the most important part of the story. The true victory is that you stopped measuring your value by another person's ability to recognize it. You discovered that your worth was never determined by who stayed or who left. It was determined by the character you chose to build every single day. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Rare people are not rare because everyone chooses them. They are rare because they continue living with integrity, compassion, confidence, and self-respect regardless of who walks away. When you become that person, rejection no longer defines your future. It simply becomes one chapter in a much greater story, a story where your greatest achievement is not making someone realize what they lost, but becoming someone who never again loses themselves in the pursuit of being enough for someone else. Is reaching a place where you no longer need to hear them. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean the memories disappear overnight. It simply means your peace is no longer dependent on another person's awareness. You finally understand that your worth has never been waiting for someone else to recognize it. It has been inside you all along. For so long you measured your value by someone else's attention. If they texted, you felt hopeful. If they disappeared, you questioned yourself. If they seemed distant, you assumed you had done something wrong. Without realizing it, you handed another person the power to decide how you felt about yourself. That is one of the heaviest burdens anyone can carry, because no human being was ever meant to be responsible for your identity. The moment you reclaim that responsibility, everything begins to change. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop creating imaginary conversations in your mind. You stop searching for hidden meanings behind every social media post. You stop living as though your future depends on another person's next decision. Instead, your energy begins flowing somewhere it should have been all along, back into your own life. You begin taking care of your body because you respect yourself. You begin learning new skills because your future matters. You reconnect with friends and family because healthy relationships deserve your attention. You pursue dreams that were placed on hold while you were busy trying to save a relationship by yourself. Little by little, your life becomes larger than your heartbreak. That is emotional freedom. Many people misunderstand confidence. They think confidence means never feeling pain. They believe emotionally strong people never cry, never miss someone, and never experience disappointment. But true confidence has nothing to do with pretending you don't hurt. Real confidence is knowing that even when your heart is broken, your identity remains whole. It is trusting that rejection cannot erase your value. It is believing that another person's inability to love you well is not evidence that you are difficult to love. That belief changes everything, because once you truly understand your worth, you stop negotiating your standards. You no longer beg for consistency. You no longer chase people who repeatedly choose distance over connection. You no longer confuse emotional uncertainty with passion. You recognize that healthy love feels peaceful, not confusing. It feels secure, not unpredictable. It feels mutual, not one-sided. Ironically, this is often the version of you that people remember most. Not the version that begged for another chance. Not the version that tried endlessly to fix everything. They remember the person who quietly became stronger, the one who carried themselves with dignity, the one who refused to let rejection become their identity. But here's the most important truth of all. You should never become emotionally healthy to make someone regret losing you. You should become emotionally healthy because you deserve to experience life without constantly questioning your worth. Whether the avoidant comes back or never speaks to you again becomes far less important than the fact that you have finally found yourself. You no longer wake up needing someone else's approval to feel complete. You no longer wait for permission to move forward. Your happiness is rooted in purpose instead of possibility. Your confidence is built on character instead of attention. Your peace comes from knowing that you gave love honestly, you learned from the experience, and you refuse to let heartbreak define the rest of your life. One day, you'll look back at this chapter and realize it wasn't the story of someone rejecting you. It was the story of you rediscovering yourself. It was the moment you stopped chasing people who couldn't win, where you stood and started building a life that reflected your true value. And that is the greatest victory anyone can ever achieve. Not winning someone back, but becoming someone who no longer needs to. Because when your life is built on self-respect, purpose, faith, and emotional freedom, no rejection has the power to steal your future. Your greatest success will never be changing another person's mind. It will always be becoming the kind of person who knows that the right people will never require you to sacrifice your peace just to earn their love.